This is Evolutionary Psychology, the podcast.
Actual evolutionary psychology by actual evolutionary psychologists.
Boom. David, today we have Steve Newberg.
Let's just say
Um,
Steve.
yeah, we'll say Steve. Okay, so now this is like the Christina introduction where we haven't gotten past the name yet. But just like the Christina episode, this is a lovely episode, and it was a bit different in the sense of actually are talking a lot about science and
Yeah.
just sort of history and the ebbs and flows of one person's journey in science and how they view it, and thinking about evolution and social psychology and reputations and the old guard and the new guard and all those things.
Yeah, very much about the sociology of science and how Steve has fit into this. And, he's done a great job of, you mentioned this in the podcast about how he has had some success in translating ideas and getting, a lot of positive reception among people who have not been steeped in evolutionary ideas. And he's a very good translator and missionary for the evolutionary social sciences. And we got into, how he pulled that off, what barriers still remain, what problems still remain in the social sciences and in psychology in particular, and how whether scientific progress is going in the right direction or not. Uh, yeah, this was
It
kind of
was
a deep meta
it was kind of
conversation.
I loved it. Yeah, I think if
Yeah,
especially if you're a student or a student at heart. I don't
yeah,
know. It's just sort of like a journey of how do you figure out what the heck we're doing. This was sort of an episode about that. And I think if you're interested in ev psych and social psychology, Steve Newberg is a really important person in the history of bringing those areas together. But if you're even just more interested in figuring out, well, how do I go to a conference where people don't assume what I'm doing makes sense? This is also a helpful thing to hear. And I think we all struggle with that.
yeah, for sure. No, this was a great time. Steve's a great hang, so I think you'll have a good time listening to this one.
Yeah, enjoy. Steve, thanks for being here.
Uh,
We
my
have
pleasure.
we've had some social psychologists on, and some of them are people who grew up in evolutionary social psychology. We've only had a few people who found evolution after they were already in
hmm
social psychology. To my
hmm
mind, you are one of the key people who brought the two fields together. And I don't think I even know this. Can you tell us a little bit about either how you found integrating evolution with social psychology, either personally or sort of what was your thought process? Because I think a lot of students may take it for granted that the two go together, but that wasn't always true.
Yeah, it came to me late, and it actually came to me it came to me in pieces, I think. Uh I mean, I had a tortured route to becoming a psych major, right? I wasn't going to be a psych major. I started as a bio major. I was going to be Hawkeye Pierce. I was going to be a smart ass cardiac surgeon. Uh and so I was gonna go to med school. And when I was an undergrad, uh uh, I hated the early level bio courses and chemistry course. I mean, they were all memorizing. It was all
Mhm.
sort of lead out for folks who wanted to go to med school, and it was really uninspiring and it was boring. I liked the labs. I liked the labs, but I hated what you needed to do, and I just didn't want to do it enough, right? To be just memorizing all the time and grinding. Uh, and so I wasn't doing particularly well. I wasn't liking it. I was exploring a lot. I was taking political philosophy classes, and I was doing all sorts of things. I did take an animal behavior class in bio that I found really interesting. And one day, one of my fraternity brothers said, "Well, you like animal behavior? I'm taking this intro psych class. Uh, I hear it's a great class. Why don't you take that? People are animals, right? Yeah, okay, people are animals." And so I took this class, and it was held by it was held in the Cornell Performing Arts Auditorium, Bailey Auditorium, 1,500 students. And I think it was probably one of the first classes in any discipline that went big and went multimedia. And so you hit week 12 or whenever they get to social psychology in this. And what the instructor had was, in addition to like the Milgram films and the Ash films, which were great, he had Cornell and Stanford were sharing the candid camera archives. And and so he was showing clips of these just funky little, social situations where essentially, the guy, and this is the old candid camera back like in the 60s or whatever. They'd be doing like these little experiments, these little sort of demo experiments, right? And it all of a sudden occurred to me, I'm sitting in the class and I'm hearing about Ash and the studies there, and so wait, you can do experiments on people? Right? You can do science on people's behavior way better than other animal behavior, from my perspective. And I was hooked, I was, the roof opened up and rays started coming in and doves started singing and angels were flying around and I became a sort of a social psychologist right at that
Mm.
moment. And at Cornell at the time, if you weren't like in engineering or something, they didn't actually let you declare a major till the end of your sophomore year if you were in arts and sciences. Uh, and so I, walked over to the psych building. This is before internet and online stuff. Walked over, walked into the secretary's office and said, I want to, be a psych major and I want to do social psychology research. And, she said, we've got this brand new faculty member coming in the fall from Stanford. His name is Tom Gilovich. And, this is students, we didn't have like professional advising, faculty advise students on things. He said, he'll be your advisor. I said, great. He's social, whatever. And I showed up and right off the bat, I was essentially Gilovich's very first student. He didn't have grad students yet. He hadn't been able to, recruit folks, whatever, and just sort of jumped right into stuff. Uh, and just got to play and started thinking about science and stuff. But I had the bio background a little bit, and it was always it was hovering, but I really wasn't really thinking. And he really is. He doesn't like. I don't know if he'd say this now. He doesn't really like Evo psych. He
Mm.
doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the approaches to it. Uh, Social psychologists ought to love evolutionary psychology, right? Because it's fundamentally about how environments and ecology sort of shape, what our psychology is, right? I mean, it's sort of social psychology writ large and deep, right? And they ought to like it, but didn't really like it. But he was a great mentor, and he let me explore. And so through that, I ended up, I had another sort of early champion, John Barge. You might know of John because
Mm.
I was interested. I did an honors thesis, which I was only allowed to do. My grades weren't good enough. My grades weren't good enough to do an honors thesis, right? And Tom, being a young guy and being naive, whatever, pleaded for me, whatever. And I said, okay, fine, fine. You're a young guy. We'll give you something here. And they let me do an honors thesis. And I met John through just doing a study that was sort of extending some of the work that he had, and I just really got into it. And then I did a section. I mean, one of my other first studies, my first real, not real, my first sort of semi research study that wasn't with Tom was actually in Sandy Bem's sex roles class,
Mm.
where for an extra credit, for a fourth credit, you could do a study. And I just did this observational study of who was holding doors open for whom at the campus bookstore. So here we are, in at highly liberal Cornell University in 1981 or something, and did the sex roles, the norms of men holding girls doors open for women. Women, of course, would be wholly opposed to this, right? I mean, this is a highly liberal place. We had, anti-apartheid, shanty towns in the middle of campus, right? This was a highly activist liberal place. And it turns out, that it turns out that men still open the doors for women, and women quite happily let them do that. And not only that, men open the door for men, and women don't open the door for other women. They walk right on through. Anyway, and so I wrote up this paper on this, and the only response I got from Sandy Bem was on the cover of the paper, which said, A, this is a great paper. Can I put this on reserve in the library as an example for other students? And, so I got these like mentoring experience. I was getting into the science, thinking about it a little bit, not deeply, but I got into it. Susan Fisk. So I ended up going, I almost went to UCSB to work with David Hamilton. In the end, it was between the two of them. And the reason, and of course, David's never been a fan of Evo Psych. I gave a talk before you ended up there. Actually, you may have been a grad student there at the time. I gave a talk on sort of some Evo approach to some prejudice work I was doing at the time. And afterwards he said, yeah, but why do you need evolution for this? I mean,
Yeah.
isn't this whatever? It's like, well, because you actually want to understand it, David,
I
right?
took a
Uh,
graduate class with David Hamilton. He was lovely. He's always been
he is lovely.
lovely.
He's
But yeah,
lovely,
there was
right?
always a little bit of not entirely meeting, I would put it
Right.
as, yeah.
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 The reason I didn't go to UCSB because David was I mean, he was a really famous social cognition stereotyping person, and that was really up the alley of what I was getting interested in. And as the days were getting closer to having to make a decision, it was probably April 7th or something, I get this manila envelope in the mail. Again, there's like no internet. I mean, people aren't sending stuff to each other, right? I mean, everything's by mail. You're getting letters, and I get this manila envelope, and I open up the manila envelope. It's from David. I open up the manila envelope. And I unfold this big poster of Santa Barbara on the beach, right? The little marsh there, whatever, right? And I look at this thing and say, I'm such a bad student. If I go to Santa Barbara, it's going
So
to be
it
a disaster,
backfired.
right? So I went to Pittsburgh and I to
Uh,
work with to work with Susan
that's funny.
Fisk, which turned out to be great. But I think what led me to, and so this was a really long ramble to get towards your answer. With Susan, we were sort of on the cutting edge in social cognition of trying to bring motivation into cognition. I mean, the motivation had been in there a little bit, but the base model, the presumption was at that time was that we operate like a computer and emotion and motivation are adds on. In fact, Susan's early model actually was just adding tags, right, to cognitive represent, adding affect tags, plus minus, right, to concepts that we would have. I mean, this was sort of the model, and we were starting to push this idea that no, that the kind of processing you're going to engage in was going to differ depending on sort of what goals were sort of important to you at the time. And, the work that we did, that ended up, I think, being pretty important was, when do people stereotype and when do they go beyond their stereotypes and individuate? And what are the circumstances? I was focusing on what are the motivations. She was focusing really on what are the informational circumstances that would lead you to give up your stereotypes. And I was really interested in what are the motivational circumstances and really thinking about, what we would now think about in terms of interdependence. We were calling it outcome dependency at the time, but what's the relationship with this person that would lead me to need to understand this person better so I could predict their behaviors, right? Because the aim, uh, from my perspective back then, it wasn't all social cognition, was that we think about people because we want to understand what they're going to do because we have to interact with them. And I didn't quite have that wasn't solid in my mind now then like it is now, but the foundations were really there. And I left Carnegie Mellon. I did a year postdoc in Waterloo. I came here, and I had Kenrick here, and so you think that Kenrick is the reason why I got into, and it isn't. We did a little bit of work after this, but the very first thing, I presume you guys know the name Robin Fox,
Hmm.
anthropologist
Yeah.
from, okay. Robin Fox wrote, I don't know if you've ever seen this paper, it's more of an essay in Psych Inquiry on stereotyping and prejudice. And what was the title? The title of the paper was something like An Unfinished Mind.
Hmm.
And so it's a Target article. It's a beautifully written article. It's a fun article to read. I still assign it to students. And uh, in which he argued that prejudice and stereotyping is sort of lower my hand. Uh, uh,
For those on the acoustic format, Steve just raised his hand in Zoom. So you have a question, Steve. Yeah.
I'm Jewish. I talk
I
with
know
my hands. And
exactly.
us ethnic folks,
Yeah.
we just right? Okay.
Uh,
Uh, and he wrote this incredible paper where he argued for the fact that prejudice is sort of the default natural state, and for good reason, right? That stereotyping and having affects towards people that can help drive behavior towards them, that was sort of the base. And so, it's a Target article with a bunch of invited commentaries. I don't know. I was just a kid then. I don't know why I was invited, but I was invited to comment on it. And I love the paper for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, it's a beautiful paper. Uh, but it was the argument was that stereotyping was an evolved was an adaptation for dealing with certain kinds of challenges. And as I was thinking about it, I was realized, yeah, but the kind of individuation that I talk about and the circumstances under which it happens and for whom we're likely to individuate, that also has to be. And so what also has to be an adaptation and part of a well-designed system. And then so now what are the factors that sort of switch you from one to the other? How do you need to think about this? And so my response was yes and right. And and it was really the first time that I really started thinking about my work in a way that uh, uh, might have had those kind of deeper foundations to it. Uh, and so that was one thing. And then Doug and I and a couple of students did some work on sort of contrast effects on attractiveness and dominance and men and women and, who would whatever. And that was sort of fun stuff, but I really wasn't into it. And then their second thing hit. And this is with another one of your colleagues, emeritus now, Dave, uh, Brenda Major. I
Yeah.
had
I
been
also took a
invited.
class with Brenda. Brenda's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and
Brenda's
Brenda's
wonderful.
more open, and Brenda became more open to thinking about sort of Brenda actually. So Rob Kurzban wrote this paper on stigma, and he wrote it actually initially for Brenda's class. Brenda
Yes.
really didn't like the paper.
Yeah, she told me
Years
because I took
later,
the same class, and I
mhm,
was the second Lita student after Rob in that same
mhm,
class in a later
right,
class. Yeah, so she told
yeah,
me about that. Yeah.
yeah. She likes the paper more now,
Mhm.
but I ended up we ended up talking a lot about it, and she sort of came around on it. But I was at a conference held by Dartmouth University up sort of on the estate. They had these small conferences that would turn into books where they'd invite like 15 people and around a topic. And so the topic was sort of the social psychology of stigma. And so it was held on like the estate that had been donated by the founder of CBS to Dartmouth. So it was literally on Golden Pond. You guys may not be old enough to know the movie On Golden Pond with Henry Fonda and Jane Fonda, but literally it was on this place. So it was a beautiful place. You're out in the middle of the woods. Uh, and the way the little work conference thing was that you didn't talk about your own work. In fact, you had 7 minutes after dinner during drink time to talk about your work. And we would do that like every night for 4 or 5 nights. And but what you do is that you sit around a big table and there'd be a question for the morning session, a question for the afternoon, and you'd argue about the question, you'd talk it through, and at the end, people decide what do they want to write about to go into this edited volume on the social psychology of stigma. And it was interesting. It was fun. There were a lot of very cool people there. Schaller was there. He'd probably be the other person who uh, ended up being sort of Evo. And and you were rooming with people, right? So is that this right? Because it was, and so I was rooming with Jack DeVideo, which was sort of cool. A very different kind of social psychologist, right? Very different view than mine. But I'm out on a boat during one of these breaks with Brenda Major and Jenny Crocker, who longtime friends, very, very close. And as they're talking about stigma, I realized that they viewed it as entirely everything was arbitrary, right? I mean, the stigma of whether you wore Jordache or Wrangler or Levi's jeans was functionally the same as being sort of stigmatized because you free ride on your community members, or because you're walking around all diseasy, or because you're from a different tribe, or because whatever. And for them, it was just all sort of deviance off of some kind of norm, and that norm could be entirely arbitrary. And I'm on the boat, and I realize this makes no sense at all. Of course, this isn't the case. There has to be some kind of universality, some deeper function. And then I started thinking about, well, what would be the things that we would stigmatize? And that really sort of got me into the whole perspective that I have.
Yeah.
Thinking about, okay, well, what is the nature of human groups? What do human groups need to be like in order to be you know uh, valuable, to add fitness value for its members, right? And then could we derive from that what those features needed to be? What are the things that then would be stigmatized? So stigma as a form of social control, right? To enable groups to be successful so that for so that individuals would be getting the fitness benefits out of it. And it was really that was the big trigger. I mean, and then Schaller and I were started talking about these kinds of things, and he, I don't know if you've had him on yet. He's just brilliant and a really creative thinker and really fun to play with. I mean, really fun to play with over ideas. And we really started building some stuff together and then going in other directions and then pulling those directions back together. And uh, I think that's really it. So in some ways, Robin Fox, right? You know, Brenda Major, right? Out of by talking about things in ways that made no sense, right? I teased Brenda about this, right? Brenda, your ignorance turned me into what I am. Uh, but then having really good mentors along the way that just led me to be open-minded and to be thinking integratively. Susan Fisk is a very integrative thinker, and she views herself as sort of supportive of Evo stuff, but she doesn't really get it. In a lot of ways, I say with great affection, Susan, if you hear this, really, really important and an incredible mentor. And, you know, Gilovich is just, go explore, do your own thing. You figure out an honors thesis, right? I'll support you. And if you want a project, I'll help you at the end if you can't find something. But, just the notion of being open to thinking about different ideas. But that Robin Fox essay was really important. And then having dug around, right, to be talking about these things and to be building on them and having the friendship with Schaller and we overlap 1 year here, right? I was a first year faculty member when he was finishing up uh, here with Cialdini
Hmm.
uh, and Kenrick, and so all those things. So that's a really long-winded answer to a very
No, it's
simple
great. It's a very vivid
Yeah.
picture. It's great.
thing.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's great because I think you are the first guest we've had who sort of came into evolutionary psychology indirectly, and that you had a successful career as a psychologist without taking an evolutionary perspective. And then all of a sudden you just had various influences and you were persuaded about the value of these
Mhm.
ideas, and then started running with it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
think one of the key things here, and Kim Hill said something to me, another great colleague at Ross campus, being at ASU is really great for this as well. I mean, there's so many people around campus to talk to, but uh, you know, I had an idea and I tested that idea and the data started coming back and the data are the data, right? Uh, and one of the things Kim told me once was that he thought that psychology was going to become more substantially evolutionary before anthropology and be accepted more by more traditional folks because psychologists care about data
Hmm.
was his line on this, that the cultural anthropologist, it's not really, it's not fundamentally about the data to them. And so to have for folks like him to have sway there, he was way more pessimistic about that than he was about, folks like me and folks like you guys having sway within psychology.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. That may well be correct. And I feel like if psychology has been more receptive to evolutionary ideas, particularly social psychology, I think it is largely due to you. I feel like you're one of the best people for persuading other non-evolutionary psychologists about the value of these ideas, interfacing with social psychologists and persuading them that these ideas are relevant and valuable to them. You're one of the best people at getting your students jobs in social psychology departments, and teaching them how to frame their ideas in a way that will be receptive to people who didn't naturally come to these ideas or weren't already steeped in them. I feel like you're one of the best people who does what I might half jokingly call missionary work of, of bringing people on board to these ideas. And I'm curious about if you have any insight into why you've been so successful at that. Has it been because you yourself were persuaded about the value of these ideas, and so you know what worked on you, and you sort of use those same tools on other people, or what is it that allows you to bring these ideas to other people in a way that doesn't turn them off, in a way that has had such an impact in making evolutionary ideas more accepted and more mainstream in psychology?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for that. I'm flattered by that. Uh, I think it's a few things. I think part of it is, and this may partially be based on my own incompetence and insecurity, that I often don't lead with sort of the strict derivations from the deep. I don't. So if we listen to a talk from a UCSB person, it'll often start with, okay, so now if we start with first principles and
Yeah.
we start with this thing right here, which by the way is going to be foreign to all of you folks over, right? Or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And we sort of apply this and we sort of work our way through. One of the benefits I have is that I was never trained as an evolutionary biologist. I never got to take an Evo course from Lita and John or any of those folks. So I have never taken an Evo course, right? I mean, it's self-taught and with costs, which I'll admit because I think there are times that I get loose, and I appreciate folks when they say, you know, you're being a little bit loose here. Okay, help me. Uh, Figure this out. So I think part of it is that because if you start at a place where that feels really foreign to folks, I think
Mm.
it's even well intentioned. It requires work. And if the foreignness is associated with a lot of the stuff that Evo Psych has unfortunately been associated with, right? You know, just a lot of wrong inferences about what our assumptions actually are, then I think it's really easy for people just sort of to turn off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember so Chris Crandall is a very traditional social psychologist. He's a very good friend. I've known him for I actually met him when he was interviewing for a faculty position at Carnegie Mellon when I was a grad student, like a last year grad student there. So we've known each other for what, coming up on 40 years now or something. Uh, and you know, he once came when I first presented some of the work that I've been doing with Kathy Cottrell on there are these, you know, prejudice isn't just valence. It's not just negative affect towards groups, right? There are these different, you know, emotional flavors to them, and those emission their anger, you know, anger focused prejudices, disgust focused prejudices, and fear, and they're there for a reason, right? They are, you know, those are uh effective adaptive responses to particular threats that these groups are perceived as posed. And when I started doing that research, and I was at a conference on prejudice, I think up in Madison, and I gave the talk on it, which was really foreign, and it was threatening to social because it meant that you have to measure prejudice. It's not there's no prejudice, it's prejudices, right?
Mm.
And they're these qualitatively different things, and those qualitative distinctions make a really big difference. You know, if you actually want to intervene, right? Then intervening, presuming that these are all the same thing, you're really going to not be very effective. And in fact, we haven't been very effective. Uh, and, you know, so I gave this talk and it was threatening to a lot of folks, but, you know, Chris came up to me afterwards and says, you know, this has to be right. Right. And, and I think it was the combination of the data and then, and the logic
Mm.
that goes to it
Yeah.
and a simpler logic, one that doesn't need to, did it come from first principle? I think this is an interesting, I should finish sentences, right?
Mm.
Uh, So I think this is maybe an interesting difference between sort of the model that we have here, for example, and the UCSB model, and I see this with so Michael Barlev is a colleague of mine now, and one of the reasons why I brought him in a long time ago as a postdoc, right, was because I wanted to put these two perspectives together and sort of see how they work and how they were similar, how they different, and how they could build each other. Is that we'll sometimes start with a phenomenon and then sort of work our way back a little
Mm.
bit and then and cycle a little bit. Okay, here's the phenomenon to be explained. What are the possible explanations? And then cycle back. Uh, and I think, you know, a UCSB model is often starting with the first principles and then saying, okay, well, now would we expect and working the way out? And I think it's the model we have is just a naturally more comfortable one for social psychologists. I think it's one that they've been doing their whole career, right? I mean, it's the one that, you know, I sort of start with, and I wasn't trained as an evolutionary uh, psychologist or biologist, and so I think that's part of it too, that that people can maybe more quickly get the grasp on the phenomenon and the nuance in the phenomenon, and then if the nuance is a bit of a threat to their current beliefs, okay, now maybe, and if they're serious scientists, then they need to think about it, right?
Right.
I have serious scientists who do stereotyping and prejudice who still come up to me, uh, and including recently a former David Hamilton social cognition student who said, you have to be right. It's the like the Evo packaging that has so many people sort of uncomfortable with it, and then thinking through, well, what would the implications be? So Carlos Navarrete, I don't know if you guys ever knew him.
Yeah, I knew
Uh,
Carlos because he was a grad student when I was a grad student at UCLA.
okay,
He was at UCLA when I was at UCSB. Yeah.
right, right. And after we published this PNAS paper on sort of ecology and stereotypes being confounded with race stereotypes, right? People from, you know, more harsh, more unpredictable environments that pulls for certain kind of behaviors, certain kind of characteristics, certain kind of strategies, and it turns out that those are highly correlated, right, with some stereotypes about African Americans in the United States, right, and so that maybe a lot of the stereotypes that we see in the United States aren't really fundamentally stereotypes about race, right? But they're maybe fundamentally stereotypes about the ecology that people are presumed to come from. And of course, that's very valuable information to have if, in fact, ecology shapes behavior, which it does. And he came after that paper got published. He came up to me at a conference and said, "Wow, that was really brave." I said, "Why? What was brave about that?" Psychologists, social psychologists in particular, should love the idea, right? That it's not fundamentally about race and that it's about environments and things like that, right? He said, no, 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 no. One of the implications of this is that maybe there's a kernel of truth to the stereotypes, right? And the thing, right, because uh, that the behaviors being engaged in, they're being engaged in because of the environment, but that people are sort of picking up on those behaviors and they're using them to make inferences and they're extending them out there to the group, that there might be a kernel of truth to stereotypes. And I was talking with this former student of David Hamilton's about this a few months ago, and he said, "Yeah, but that's not a kernel of truth. What a kernel of truth means, it's not about predicting the, it's about that there's an essence that is genetically based." I said, "No, no, 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 no." And I think there's an inference that people make about Evo stuff, that what we're saying, because there may be these systems that exist that drive
Right.
these things, that they're inherent and that they're deterministic and whatever, and the ideology just doesn't let them go there, right? I'm not going there. None of us go there, right? They think we're going there with it, and so
Mm.
if they adopt a perspective that they're going there, or they'll be seen as going there. And I gave a talk once at a conference down in Sydney. Uh, Again, one of these small conferences, they pull people together. Uh, Kenrick had been to this conference a couple of years earlier, and Wendy Wood had been there as well. And they just hated that stuff, hated all those ideas that Doug was talking about, where he was talking about sex differences and mating and things like that. And I gave a talk on sort of more social cognition-y things. In fact, didn't talk about sex differences at all. But I was talking about different motivational systems and how it was shaping different aspects of cognition about people. And afterwards, he came up to me and said, "Now that's a kind of evolutionary psychology I can like, that I
Yeah.
can, right? And that I can, and why? Because it had nothing to do with sex differences. And she had these commitments to what it meant to be male and female, and what differences look like and where they must come from. And if they came from here, then oh my God, if they came from there, then that would be okay. And it would, right? And so it was sort of driven by commitments. And I think we still have that problem. I think some of that problem is coming back. I think over the last 5 years ago, I think maybe since the murder of George Floyd, and a lot more sort of social justice activism within academia, and now backlash and backlash for the backlash and all that. I think there is more concern about how one comes across a little bit. Uh, but in the end, you know, the data are the data. Yes, they need to be interpreted, and yes, when there are alternative interpretations, we got to work really, really hard to sort of tease them apart, right? But what's really clear is that in the areas that I focus on, you know, how people think is so much more nuanced and so much more based on trying to solve fundamental challenges of social living than what our science uh, has presumed it to be. If we measure things really simply, you don't discover the complexity. And we've had very simple measures because our theories initially call for very simple measures. And so we don't see the complexity, and so people can keep moving on, but we're not making progress without diving in deeper, I don't think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see if I can take a stab at summarizing um,
That'd
your
be useful.
answer. What I hear you saying is that, there are two approaches to framing evolutionary ideas and their utility to studying humans. And there's the Santa Barbara, I'm probably caricaturing, but the
Yeah.
Santa Barbara approach is very much, we're going to start with the Big Bang.
Yeah.
And if you read,
The John Tooby talk
the John Tooby
started, yeah.
method, and if you read any Tooby papers, they tend to start with the Big Bang. They start
Mhm.
with, the thermodynamics and
Yeah, right.
replicators, and then, work their way from first principles to the phenomenon that you're interested
Yes.
in.
Yeah, I
Um,
didn't learn until listening to the Lita thing that he started off as like a physics major.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
You can, it makes sense in retrospect. Yeah,
that's right.
totally,
there's
yeah,
not a mental state anywhere in that story either, which I love, but yes, exactly. Like it's physics and design. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you take a very different approach. Rather than starting with the Big Bang or the law of thermodynamics, which could alienate people who don't really think about that or don't find it relevant. You start with the thing that people actually care about, which is, say, prejudice. So we all it's just so immediately you get on the same page with the people you're talking to. We're both interested in prejudice. We're both interested in what causes it and how we can change it, right? And when you start from there and then bring in the evolutionary ideas, well, here is how we can gain insight into prejudice and where it comes from and how to change it. Then people are going to be much more receptive because you're starting on a place of common ground. We share the same goals. And then here's how my approach can help you achieve these goals that we share.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I also think that both are absolutely necessary. And the notion of, Cialdini talks about full cycle psychology in a different kind of way. But if we think about sort of, just, observing phenomena and, understanding this isn't going to come out right. Uh, uh, Requiring ourselves to have sort of the deep logic. Both of those things are true. And I think, where I benefit from interacting with folks that come out of the Lita and John uh, tradition is that they sort of really force me to think harder and deeper about those things. I think some of the value we add is that we're maybe seeing earlier a lot of the complexity that needs to be explained, right? And those have to meet, right? Those have to meet to have a really really strong science of, what we're trying to do here, I think. So I think they're entirely complementary. I don't see them as being competing at all, but maybe there's a little bit of uh, an aesthetic difference in sort of where one start, or maybe, like I said, it may just be a practice difference, right? I mean, I grew up in one place, I didn't grow up in the other place, and so it's sort of where my mind goes first.
Yeah, and I did the a first graduate class. There had never been a graduate class in evolutionary psychology at UCSB, believe it or not. And
Mhm.
I transformed what was the undergrad class that Lita had been teaching, that I had been teaching since I was a graduate student, and that I taught when I left and taught elsewhere. I reformatted that into a grad class, and it was largely doing a task analysis. And this is also in the David Lewis et al. Bus Lab paper, where you can go phenomenon first or adaptive problem first. And you can just sort of, and when you do phenomenon first, it's really, does it quack like a duck? Does it sound like a duck? Does it swim like a duck? You're really just interrogating, well, what is the phenomenon you're talking about? But as you said, Steve, then you're translating that into the job of an evolutionary psychologist is to take an important phenomenon and then have this gambit or these guesses of what are the likely adaptations that are underlying this, you know? And I like both of you, like David with humor or with like status games, or Steve looking at prejudice or discrimination or stigma. The skill and the art is to look at a complicated real world phenomena and pare it down to at least one or two really plausible sets of adaptive problems, which is not easy. But I think you're describing, Steve, exactly like what it is to be day to day an evolutionary psychologist is you're just looking at the world. And this is even something John Tooby used to say, like your job is to just sort of the news, history, day to day life. You're always translating that into what are the adaptations or likely sets of adaptations causing that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. Uh, it's fun. I like the fact that that there's sort of these different flavors of approach to it. I mean, I find that I find that enriching, and I have to say, so this is the first sabbatical I think I've had. I'm on sabbatical right now. I can't tell that I'm on sabbatical right now. I shouldn't be here in my office. Uh, uh, that I haven't actually gone to UCSB for a week or so to hang out and to talk to Lita and the social psychologist and everyone else there about the idea that's like bouncing around in my head, right? And I've done that. I've done that a few times, and it's been incredible. I probably need to find a way of showing. When is your semester over? It's like in June or something.
I'm not teaching, so I have
You're
no
not
idea.
teaching. You have no
I
idea.
have
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
You have
So
to ask Annie. Okay.
yeah,
Uh, uh, but yeah, I need
couple
to
weeks.
couple weeks. Okay. Yeah, I probably missed the opportunity this year for that. Uh, but yeah, I've always benefited greatly from going to Santa Barbara and and talking with folks and throwing the ideas out there, and then having them gently over a 6 hour period of time, 3 or 4 hours in the CEP meetings, and then over dinner with Lita and John afterwards. Having them interrogated in really sort of fun ways.
Mm.
Cool. So you mentioned earlier that you work with Tom Gilovich and he just didn't get it in your words, and there are still some people who don't get it. And I'm curious what you think is going on there. What explains the holdouts? I mean, you mentioned some of it where there's some political concerns about there
Yeah.
being, genetic determinism or stuff like that. That's probably part of it. Do you think that's all that's what
No,
is
it's
it?
not all of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that another aspect of it is sort of the David Hamilton comment. Yeah, but why do we need it? Right. And
Hmm.
I think this has to do, I used this term in a little bit of a different sense a few minutes ago, of a sort of a scientific aesthetic. That is,
Hmm.
what are you really trying to accomplish with your science? I mean, what sort of
Yeah.
feels right or looks right for you? At what level do you really want to explain? I mean, what
Mm.
counts as explanation for you? What counts as understanding for you? And
Hmm.
I think that's actually probably the bigger thing. It's like, yeah, yeah, fine, but why do we need it? Let's just, you got a long pathway of a model here. Why don't we just start right here, right? Why do we need to understand that stuff
Yeah.
as well, right?
Hmm.
And I think and the assumption there, especially for those psychologists who are interested in at least having their work be relevant to intervention. Well, geez, the closer you can intervene to the thing that you want to change, maybe the better off you are anyway. So do you really need to understand this bigger frame that's deeper and sort of causally further back? And I've always wanted to sort of dive in and to play with that idea a little bit more because, my intuition on it is that no, it makes a huge difference because it tells you what territory you need to be in, right? And I think we're missing huge territories, right? Because we're not asking. That because we're not understanding the adaptive problem, so we're not looking in the right places, right? And so we're uh Yeah, we're blind, right? We're sort of theory blind to where a lot of the stronger possibilities might be, right? And sort of thinking that through and developing that a little more. I'll never do it, but I think that would be a useful thing, in terms of you know, helping folks uh, who aren't as driven as much by the ideology, but just still don't understand. Yeah, but why do we need it? And I think there's also this different level of curiosity, right? I mean, so
Mm.
2B was starting as a physicist. Everything starts it, right? I mean, he's curious about a lot of things. Everything needs to connect. Everything needs to
Mhm.
connect, right?
Yeah.
And and I think for a lot of folks, everything doesn't need to connect, right?
Mm. That's really interesting. Yeah, it's almost like there are different appetites for explanation, and we just have a really deep hunger to get as deep as possible in the explanatory uh, depth of what we're looking at. And some people are not as hungry for explanatory depth. They're happy if they can just explain something at a shallow level, and that might be, an individual difference variable.
Yeah. I mean, at a what I would say for a lot of them, it would be at a mechanistic level,
Mm,
but not understanding, why those mechanisms, and therefore maybe not understanding nuances in them they don't see because they don't measure the right stuff, right? Or they're
mm,
not seeing alternative mechanisms as well because again, they're not thinking about it in terms of the problem that this ultimate behavior is trying to or problems that they're trying to solve, right? And so I think it's a blindness outside the particular mechanism sort of current focus. And they say, okay, there's something here. Let's come in and let's really sort of understand that. Uh,
yeah,
Again, not realizing that there's all this other stuff out there that they're not
yeah.
seeing.
I mean, what
Oh, sorry.
one? I'm gonna just give you one thought that came to me about like how these people might be persuaded. It seems to me like what they're trying to do is they're trying to fix a machine. Let's say it's a car, but they're ignoring what the machine is and what its function is and what the different parts of it are designed to do. And you're going to have a much harder time fixing a car if you don't know that what you're fixing is a car and the part and if you don't know what the function of the part you're looking at is, right? You're going to have a really hard time. So it seems like if you want to fix the car, you have to understand number one, that it is a car, and number two, that it has a set of functionally specialized parts that are designed to do different things. And you're going to have, imagine a mechanic who doesn't know what he's fixing, and doesn't know the function of the things he's looking at, right? So that might be
Right.
one argument you could give
Right, or doesn't
for,
understand what the relate. So you're going in and you even if you understand sort of part of the machine and you're going in to like fix a piston or something like
mm,
that, or you're trying to make it better or whatever
yeah,
you're trying to do, but you don't realize what the relationship between that piston is and
yes,
these other things. And if it turns out yeah, you can get it cranking faster. If you get it cranking faster, the suspension is not going to hold. I'm making stuff up.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
nothing, of
sure,
course,
sure,
right? Right.
yeah,
And a real system wouldn't work like that, right?
yeah,
It's sort of a real sort of adaptive system wouldn't have pistons that work
yeah,
in the kind of way that its suspension couldn't
yeah,
couldn't hold
yeah.
together, right?
I,
yeah,
I also think it's really, one cannot overestimate the sociology of the moral landscape of
yeah,
academia. And I really
yeah,
think that also, if you grow up in a world where you're focused on a mechanism and people who are appealing to evolution are using that to essentialize or justify social or gender discrepancies, then it's not only a lack of curiosity, it's a marker of there's another group of people who have an agenda that's not to figure out the mechanism, but to just essentialize the existing status quo. And that did happen. And that's not what
Mhm.
some evolutionary psychologists or most evolutionary psychologists are doing, but it does make sense why people would have that perspective. And it's very much probably implicit thing of part of theory is sort of a marking, it's like a coalitional or coordination marker of like, who's my moral circle? We're all good, but
Mhm.
there's other people who are up to no good. And theory is
Mhm.
part of marking that. And so not wanting to adopt another theory has this like loyalty and moral tinge to it.
I think that's true. And I was if we would have had this conversation, 7 or 8 years ago, what I would have said is that younger people, and I still think this is the case, that younger scholars are way more open to what we're doing than older scholars and folks of my generation and and beyond, uh, because they didn't grow up in the in the social activism and social constructivism sort of days of the 60s and the 70s and all of that, and have that be sort of part core of their identities and of their affiliations or coalitions and the
Yeah.
like. And then the world got easier and simpler, and okay, now we can look at the world and we don't need these particular lenses. And I think, younger psychologists were becoming more open to the evolutionary approach. I do wonder now, like over the last 5 years or so, whether that's taken has taken a hit again. Younger scientists are different now uh, than they were. They're more sensitive to a lot of things. I think they feel more vulnerable. Uh, they are. Uh, Even more cynical of what they view as power structures, which are defined by things that are very much sort of extra scientific, right? Uh, and yeah, and part of so I think it'll be interesting over these next 5 or 10 years to see, whether, the sort of the growth in the acceptance of evolutionary psychology takes a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a hit. I think eventually, the the science is going to win out, but I'm an optimist. Uh, uh, but yeah, we'll see. And part of my local pessimism about this might have been I was chair for 6 years. I was chair during, sort of the COVID, George Floyd times where young people, especially, sort of grad students, especially, right, just became very, very activated and very, very sensitive to things that could be seen as oppressive in one way or another. And
Yeah.
so I wonder whether we're gonna be fall back into being stereotyped in those ways again.
Yeah,
Uh,
or we're part of the anti-oppression articulation. So I feel like the last 5 or 6 years, I feel like uh, um, I don't know if it's COVID or I don't know if it's the political climate. Like, not to get political about things, I do feel like as an academic, I'm sort of living through a dying institution. Like
yeah.
journals. I mean, I don't know how David feels about this, but I'm old enough that I feel like I was at the tail end of the golden era of you could publish an article that didn't have fancy glossy figures in it. People would read the articles. Maybe I was a kid and maybe this was all, maybe this is just a thing of when you're a kid, the world is ideal. And when you grow up, you realize it's not. But like I'm old enough that I didn't have like as much internet science and it wasn't as much like glossy photos. And now it just feels like, especially sped up with like AI and these things where it's just sort of funding, publishing, teaching, all of these things just feel like it's sort of a dying institution. And so even myself, like the last 5 or 6 years, I feel like there is more extra scientific garbage, or you're sort of aware of all the ways in which science is being harmed from all these outside forces. And I feel more oppressed in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. Uh,
Holding myself constant. It's a within participant, within subjects effect. Yeah.
right. Uh,
Yeah, share that vibe. I think there is a sense that something is decaying. Maybe it's just an illusion, and I don't know. But
Yeah.
curious if you share that feeling,
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just you get older as a scientist and you realize the ways you were idealizing the process and then you see the warts and sausage being made and that's always
Yeah.
true. Or if it's really that there's there's just a very different experience that older faculty in my department, for example, didn't have to deal with. A lot of these things that now current faculty, especially young faculty, are dealing with that are really new problems. I mean, maybe they had other new problems back in the day, but
I think there's a this may be sort of orthogonal to what you guys were talking about. I think uh, science among serious scientists is getting there's like a pressure to be safer in it, right? Uh, and I think part of this came out of a lot of very legitimate criticisms, having to do with reproducibility uh, and how we were doing, how we were analyzing data and all of that, so I think there's some really legitimate criticism. I think we're doing a lot of that better now, right? Uh, but I think scientists are uh, becoming more afraid of making mistakes and getting caught in mistakes. We've become, science by Arthur Anderson versus by Magellan, right? That we're concerned with these type 1 errors, right? We don't want to have any false positives, and so we get safe and the science gets narrower and we get more specialized and we don't swing for the fences as much, right? But I think there's a huge cost to that, right? You have to head out into the open seas. I mean, otherwise the science it gets small, right? And if you think about times when you don't need small science, I think now times you don't need small science, right? And I think uh, there've been a lot of concerns in terms of what people are willing to do and what people are willing to sort of put out there and what risks they're willing to take. And partially because, the criticism can be so fierce and it can be so quick and it can be so ad hominem. I remember, so my mentor, Susan Fisk, uh, did some work with, and I'm actually not going to mention her name because this was a really horrible experience for her, but who had some papers who got seriously criticized. Uh, and some might have been legitimate criticisms, but not based on the morality of the scientists,
yeah.
right? Uh, and Susan's dad was Donald Fisk. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you guys, but Fisk and Campbell, he was a very, very sort of important methodologist way back when, in the University of Chicago. Uh, uh, and there was a person who like threw out there on social media, Donald Fisk would be spinning in his grave looking at this stuff, right? And it just cruel, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's this environment out there that the world can see what you do, they can misinterpret what they do, they can label it how they want to. Recovering is way harder, right? Tearing something down, right, and recovering from accusations is really, really hard. And so I think we're getting a little bit safer. And uh, and I think for people who feel compelled to be safer, right? I think that has to feel lousy. I think it has to feel stifling, or maybe you just get used to it a while and then science changes. And if that's the case, that's sort of heartbreaking. Uh, I have a thing. I have a couple things that you can see around my office if you wander in. You know, One is a quote by Einstein, not all that relevant here, but really it's a little bit of a it's a it's a critique of sort of over parsimony, right? That sometimes we way oversimplify things. You still have to account for the data, right? And what nature says. But I have this thing here that's a story about Enrico Fermi, who's taking a tour of some other physicist's lab, and he's asked afterwards, essentially, "Hey, so what do you think?" And I- research appears to be technically impeccable, but theoretically unexciting. But maybe so. But these are like bricks in the wall of in the edifice of science, right? The person comes back to them and says, "Well, no, most of them are just bricks laying around in a brickyard." And the message for that is like, no bricks. We shouldn't be, just making bricks, right? They have to be about something. And there's another metaphor I sort of like, especially with students as they're at the stage where it's now time for them to sort of think about an identity, think about what your thing is going to be, start doing this. And it's the metaphor of a shot across a bow. And that, the very first piece of work you do and sort of with a new question, a new area, it should be designed to be a shot across the bow. And that is in the sense that if you're right, and if the data turn out that people have to say, whoa, huh, this would change things. If this is right, this sort of, and if I decide I'm going to take this seriously, right, as a scientist, this has to change things, right? And I think we need to be doing more of that as opposed to, I mean, I think a lot of people add bricks to their own edifices. I guess that's okay. Adding bricks to someone else's edifice. Okay, that's fine, but that to me is that's minor league science. That what we really need more people doing is, and I don't care if you're wrong, right? I mean, here's the other thing about science that's incredible, right? I mean, if it's about something important, right? Uh, it's people are going to try to replicate it. They're going to try to build on it, and we'll discover that it's wrong, right? That to me is such a lesser cost than not to go out there and to take the risks and try to generate something that would make a difference, right? In how we understand things.
Yeah. Gerd Gigerenzer has a very similar thing. It's like an older theory and psychology paper where he's at a lunch with students and there's faculty, and the young students are asking faculty for advice, and the faculty are saying, well, you really want a safe topic that you know you're going to get about 3 or 4 papers worth of data from. And then, you can have your sort of speculative idea you can pursue later when you're a faculty member. And then Gert style honesty is like, that's fine if you want to be mediocre, but really you should. So it's a similar sentiment. I hear
Well, I
that,
mean,
but yeah, no, David, yeah, go ahead.
no, no, it was
Oh, yeah,
so, but the thing is, if it's an interesting question, the data are going to be valuable no matter what. You'll still get those 3 or 4 papers, worth of, data if you're asking important questions, right?
Yeah.
And you're designing the studies well, right?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
No, that's an
think,
important thing. Yeah, we have to be asking questions that are interesting enough that no matter, what the answer is, it's going to be interesting, right? Where it's bad when we get into a place where the questions we're asking, they only matter if the data come out one way. And if they don't come out that way, then whatever, we'll put it in the file drawer. Like that's a bad place to be for science. We want to be asking questions that really give you interesting data, however they come out.
yeah, I also like, I mean, everybody has their own sort of personal situation that they're in. I think one's expression of sort of what's going on in science is a readout of that. And I'm aware that like what I'm about to say is largely my experience. But I also think, uh, I also grew up with the theory crisis. Like I actually was submitting, I had a paper out at JPSP under Chick Judd at the same time the infamous Daryl Bem paper came out. And I think one of the other problems is there's still this is all a symptom still of the theory crisis because they're from a younger person's perspective, there was a view of the older guard, which is probably unfair, was the currency was like, is it surprising? And if you wanted to do sort of slower science where you just publish like a derivation of what we should be looking for in the mind, or a theory that isn't surprising but is true and hasn't been documented, that's sort of more incremental, but I would argue more profound because but it wasn't in the currency of surprising. Um, that was a generational conflict, and I think some of the I know who you're talking about, the Susan Fix student, and it was horrible. I know her pretty well. I think some of those were the growing pains, and where I think we're still in the growing pains of, as a science, psychology is still not figured out. It hasn't figured out the division of labor, of who's doing what, and what are all the things that need to be done. And I think a lot of people feel like victims in that miscoordination, and then people feel justified to harm other people because they're like, I wasn't valued. I'm a statistician and I see how everybody's doing everything wrong, and I wasn't valued, so I'm going to hurt somebody else. Or I'm an evolutionary psychologist and people don't value adaptationism, so I'm going to hurt somebody else. Or I want to be shoot for the fences in a phenomenon, but nobody cares about that anymore. So I think everybody is correct. I think it's just we're not coordinated enough yet as a science.
Yeah, that I'm trying to think about what coordinated science looks like. I mean, so in physics, they have, they make a distinction between sort of theoreticians and empiricists, right? Uh, and and rarely do they meet. Rarely do they do both things. Uh, yeah, I do think the surprising thing was a big and it was a criterion in a lot of journals, and I think it was a big problem. Uh, but I think it was the version of surprising that was the big problem. That is that it had to surprise your well-evolved intuitions,
Right.
right? Which also meant that a lot of those things were going to be wrong, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But there's
Things your
another form
grandmother
of
couldn't tell you about classically. It was like,
that's right, right, right,
I think
right,
there's
right.
it's a Kurt Gray and Dan Gilbert paper, how to do
Dan Wagner,
interesting.
maybe.
Dan Wagner,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And we forget that your grandmother knows a lot of things. She's pretty smart.
Well,
She's
you know
been
what?
around the block a few
But
times. Yeah.
she knows
Yeah.
everything. She knows
Yeah.
that absent makes the heart grow fonder, and
Yeah.
she knows out of sight, out of mind.
yeah,
She knows
exactly.
both of those things.
Yeah,
Does she
Yeah.
know when those
yeah.
are? I
She
mean,
can see, but she
but
doesn't know how she sees. That's also
yeah,
true,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So, but the other thing here is that there is a kind of surprising that I think is really important, and that is surprising relative to the dominant theoretical frames of the time,
yeah,
right? And the
yeah,
Yeah.
challenging of the frames. And so sometimes a response that I get to some of my research is uh, this hindsight thing. Oh yeah, of course there are these different kind of prejudices or whatever. And so okay, so what? Right? And I'd say, okay, well look at every one of your theories. Show
yeah,
me one theory that actually can generate this set of predictions. It's like, oh, right. That's sort of the shot across the bow. That's the kind
yeah,
of surprising thing that we do need, right?
yeah,
The things that challenge the standard frames that we have. Uh, uh, and that's where the advances
yeah.
come from. The problem is that the kind of surprising that we were going after was the Grandma Bubba, surprising.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think my opinion is that the journals are not adequately organized or articulate what I want, and where to send this kind of paper. Like, I think the journal landscape is really bad right now. And I think there's so many people I talk to who send papers out to different journals and they're just desk rejected because this is not the kind of paper we want, but there's no articulation of where. And if it's not the operationalization of sort of this is where you do this kind of paper is not articulated. And I think editors with no guile or malicious intent are nervous and they want their journal to look sciency. And if something looks out of place or different than what is usual, then they'll just sort of say, well, I don't want to be under the tutelage of this journal taking weird looking, less sciency looking things.
Right. So I think that's right. And again, it leads to safe science. And I think, the funding agencies, NIH would, I mean, you pretty much have finished all the studies that you'd be proposing in an NIH proposal, and provide, enough of that sort of pilot data on it, before NIH would say, yeah, okay, we'll spend money on this now. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just very, very, safe. And I guess that's, we can think about scarcity in different kind of ways. We can think about it in terms of money. I guess for the journal, it's, is it scarcity of sort of reputation or just the concern of making a mistake and getting caught? And when I was associate editor of JESP a long time ago, with Russ Fazio as the editor, and we instituted a thing. It may have been one of the very first versions of this, which were short papers. So there'd be a long and I can see in some ways why this would be viewed as outrageous now, right? Now this was before the replication crisis and everything, where the notion was, no, we don't want to spend 30 pages on this, right? Uh, you got four studies and whatever, and yep, stuff. But it's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
So let's pull out the study that's the best exemplar of the idea, and we'll give you 7 pages or whatever the number was, and and let's get that out there so the world can see it, right? Now, what that sort of meant was, okay, and this is before the age of computer, online supplements and all,
Yeah,
because
exactly. Yeah. You had to pay
people
for
wouldn't
the
see
you
all
had to
the
pay
other
for the
stuff that
paper.
was
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I can see why that would get critiqued now. But the notion was, again, that it's an idea that's worth having out there, and if it's an important idea and it turns out to be wrong, we're going to discover it. And that's okay. That's the way, I mean, we should be thrilled
Yeah.
by that. That's the way science works. I'd rather have an idea that turns out to be wrong. I'd rather generate an idea, have it out there for a while, and then someone say, it's really this, it's not that, and say, okay. I think under that circumstance I will still have made a contribution because I would have had an idea out there that would have been significant enough that could have, and now boom, we got people talking, we learned something. Yes, this is now off the table, and we're going here. That's science moving forward. I think
Yeah.
that's a hard thing, and maybe that's easier because I'm old, right? And my career is set. You know, I'm a full professor. I'm tenured. I make a good salary. I'm not forced to retire at any age. I can sort of do this however I want. So that's easy for me to I think to say that. I think for a young untenured person, that's a way harder thing to say, especially these days, and especially again how quickly one can get devastated by the commentariat out there in the out there in the world. So.
Yeah. This is very meta. This is good though.
I know.
Yeah. Maybe we should talk about with Steve Newberg, the evolutionary psychology you do. No, but this is wonderful. It reminds me there's a Jerry Fodor, when Jerry Fodor passed away, there was a memorial service and somebody talked about how they remembered going up to Jerry Fodor and saying, this one idea I think you have is actually pretty reasonable, and he looked shocked and he's like, but it's still pretty unreasonable, right? Like he wanted to be the contrarian, or to provoke people, to get them to think. And I think that's,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's really important. And I think a science that doesn't encourage that, I think it's a litmus test of we're probably incentivizing the wrong thing. If we can't be like, hey, let's, what if this is true? Let's figure this out. Like, yeah.
Or we just need to be, is ecumenical the right term, in terms of the different kind of sciences and the different kind of scholarship that we're open to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got colleagues in the department, and the work to me is totally uninspiring, but it's important in certain kind of ways because it helps people with mental illnesses, right? Deal with their
Yeah.
challenges, right? It's not interesting to me, but it's really useful, and there needs to be space for that.
Yeah.
I also want them to look at stuff that I and some of my colleagues are doing, where it's way further to get to application, but it's about how the mind works, and
Yeah.
that's really an important thing, right? And let's understand that. And so, and I think if we're a little bit less sort of intradisciplinarily tribal or whatever, that's something that would be good for us.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, this goes to Dave's point, which I think is very well articulated, that it's about, coordination failures among, we're just not rowing in the same direction. It's more like every man for himself. There's no cohesive paradigm. There's no shared goal or shared philosophy about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we're looking for and how our science should be. I mean, maybe the solution to that is to have more, broad conferences where people from diverse parts of the social sciences come together and get on the same page. But, that has its own challenges and that's also hard in different ways. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a great quote. I can't remember who said it that the best interdisciplinary work is done within one's own mind.
I think you said it was Jerry Fodor. Back
Yeah, I
to
think it was
Fodor.
Jerry
It
Fodor.
was, you
Yeah,
said
I could be wrong, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sounds like something Jerry Fodor would say.
You
The
attribute it to
best
Jerry Fodor early in an earlier
Yeah.
the
episode.
best interdisciplinary work happens within one's own mind. Yeah, see, yeah, I don't buy it. I think, what you actually need are people who come at things from very different perspectives, but have an ethos of listening and learning from one
Yeah.
another. And it's hard. It takes. I've done several interdisciplinary kinds of uh, sort of bigger projects, and it's hard because it takes a while to get the language. And I know I remember one instance doing this project on religion and conflict, where it took a full year before I realized that two of us were using the same term in very different ways.
Yeah,
Right. Because, the disciplines use them in different ways and that we didn't even realize that we had sort of been taught. We finally realized this is why we're talking past each other.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
And it took a year. Right. And so doing that kind of work is hard, but no one can be an expert in tons of things. Right. And so you want folks who have the depth of expertise, and then you want to be willing to listen and to let the ideas collide and converge and to meld uh, and everything. I think.
yeah. And it's hard to get the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I remember, I mean, Steve, I think you're doing exactly what David is describing here, which is you're helping coordinate, right? But it's hard because number one, and I think students really feel this, is that if you go, for example, to a social psychology pre-conference and you don't use the same terminology or you're coming from a different perspective, we all absorb these norms of this is the way I usually do this. And I think to their credit and detriment, social psychology is a very norm heavy discipline. I think there's lots of anecdotal data. For a while you couldn't get a paper published without a path diagram. I mean, it was
Mhm.
very, they were like, I remember working with social psychologists. They're like, no, you have to say this thing in this way. You have to have this
Mhm.
kind of figure. You have to have this kind of statistic. I was like, but you don't even know what the study's about. It doesn't matter. This is the norm.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
and so I think like going up in front of a group of people, violating the norm, knowing you're doing that by having a different approach, it's a vulnerability. It would be hard for a young student, especially
It's
for
hard for young
women
people.
and for
Yeah.
women or anybody like for example, like if you're not the kind of phenotype or the that is given the benefit of the doubt for multiple reasons, then
Mhm.
there's this additional problem of in order for me to even facilitate coordination, the audience has to give me the benefit of the doubt in a 15-minute talk. Are they going to? So I think like it's very courageous for everybody to do it, but I think it's really good when people do it like you, Steve, because it opens the door for other people who may not even be able to do that.
Well, I'd never thought about that, but thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, I do think that, one of the this is not only, part of the problem in doing the science, but maybe in our broader societies is that we've moved away from giving people the benefit of the doubt, right? And that has just humongous costs. Uh, it has costs, for when that benefit isn't given, but it has huge costs in people knowing that they're not going to be given it, and therefore they're spending all this time and all this effort to uh, to over-explain is not quite the right word, but to avoid the potential cost of being misinterpreted, and that's just a heavy weight, right? To know that I can't go and have a 5-minute conversation with someone, that is just totally play, right? Because I could be misinterpreted, I could do this, to have to, think about exactly how I'm going to say every single thing, that I don't leave this out, that I what be I mean, that's a heavy weight, and that's a weight that takes away from doing a lot of creative good things.
Mm.
I'd rather, if you think, and I see this actually in some communication. I've been talking to some colleagues about this. I see sometimes tensions arise where, someone will write an email, right? Not even about, so they'll write an email and someone will have an interpretation of that. And instead of asking a question, let me understand, are you saying this or are you saying this? They presume that they're saying that. And now all of a sudden you have a conflict where there's never any need to have a
Yeah.
conflict. And now people are going, they're cycling on this. It's now the person who's been accused of something that they didn't do, now they're offended and everyone's offended. Uh, yeah, I think those two things, we don't give people the benefit of the doubt and we're too easily offended. You put those two things together and it's hard to do really good science. It's hard to communicate really good science and to take risks.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or even if we're not more offended, there's the selection for attention, right? Like there's just new coordination devices like social media, or, if I'm just doing my science, nobody's paying attention to me. But boy, I just said something controversial, or that could be interpreted, or I just knocked somebody down. All of a sudden, I've got, thousands of people looking at me. That felt good. I'm going to do more of that, right? So even if people, individually are no different, there's now like a institutional selection
Yeah. Yeah.
for these things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually think that, and the knocking down, I think we saw a lot of that uh, for young people who are sort of trying to be on their way up. I mean, it's exciting. It's a drug, right? And it can really be reinforcing. And so I'll tell you something that I have a little bit of shame about. So not because I think I did the science wrong, but because of how I felt, with the communication of it. So I was in a controversy. I don't know if I should be even saying this. I was in a controversy
You cut
with
it out
R.E.A.
if we need to. Yeah.
Kruglansky in the mid 1980s about this individual difference construct, personal need for structure, and need for cognitive closure that he was doing some work on. And I don't need to go into the content of it, but we ended up, uh, I ended up learning around 2 months before we were both, me and a student of his, were going to be on a panel together talking about sort of need for structure kind of ideas and how they shape cognition and all sorts of other things. Okay. So what I discovered in the couple months before, because I got an email from a student at another place that says, the scale over here that you've helped advance, done by other people, not by me, but that I published on it, and this scale over here by Kruglansky and his colleagues, they're correlated like zero point 0.8. It's like, no, and I was a reviewer on that group. I said, no, they couldn't be correlated zero point 0.8, right? They, they're correlated zero point 0.2. It says, no, 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 look, here are my data. So we ran a thing here, and yes, it's zero point 0.8 and attenuating for over whatever. They're essentially the same scales, but one's way longer, has a lot of bad items in it, and one is shorter. But all those items were overlapped. And logically, of course, they were correlated. And I had like 4 colleagues around the country in your own samples. Go ahead, what is it? And then we dove deeper and we were looking at the structure of these, and we had sort of a legitimate sort of critique. And the problem was, from the science perspective, was that the way they were doing it, they were taking two independent constructs, but it was making it look like it was just one construct.
Mm.
And that was going to lead to a lot. In, I'm a splitter as opposed to a lumper, theoretically, and it was going to lead to a lot of wrong inferences about really what was going on with all these social cognitive processes it was being used for. And so at this conference, and it was, I think, the one time that SESP and the European Association had a joint conference. I think it was in DC. And we were on this panel together. So around a month before, I said, you know what, I'm going to change the topic of my talk. I think this is really important. I'm going to talk about this stuff because it's about the construct. But here's what I'm going to say. Everyone has a heads up. Here's what I'm going to say beforehand. No one's going to get, and if you want to put me at the end, right? So that you don't feel the need to sort of respond to what I'm going to say in your own talks. Absolutely fine. They put me at the end. They actually tried to have me not be allowed to talk about that. And to their credit, the conference organizer said, this is science. Conferences are about the cutting edge stuff at the front end. Yes, he can change his mind about what he's going to talk about. Uh, there was the sort of his allies on the panel sort of filibustered. By the time it got to Schaller was also on the panel, talking about other stuff. By the time it got to me, there were like 7 minutes left for my, 17-minute talk, and there was no time for nuance. And this is back in the days of overhead projectors, and
Mm,
so Schaller's like slapping the things down on the thing, and I'm just going boom, boom, boom. No nuance, no political sensitivity. And at the end of the talk, Ari's in the audience because the student had presented, and he said, I've got some things to say. So he says the one thing, I start to answer. He says, no, 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 no. You've had your chance to talk. Now it's my turn. And it's at the end of a
wow.
session. People aren't leaving the room. We're going overtime, right? The rooms, people are coming in, and instead of trying to kick us off, this is like the coolest thing they've ever seen at a conference because we're going back and forth. And and I got a buzz off of it,
Yeah.
right? And I feel some shame for the buzz I got off of it. A young guy, I was a young guy at the time. In fact, uh, before I went and I did that, I had just gotten tenure. In fact, I asked, Bob and Doug, Cialdini and Kenrick, uh, whether I should do this or not. And they said, this is what tenure's for, right? This is what tenure's for. If you believe the data, if you believe, then you should do this. Uh, so but it went beyond the science uh, at that point for me, and that was wrong. And that was wrong. He and I didn't chat we didn't talk, and we hadn't known each other well. And he, in fact, been a supporter of me when I was very young, uh, for like 10, 15 years. Bring a happy end to the story. Uh, he, we're in a lobby at another conference. I'm sort of standing chatting with someone, and I see him walking down. He's gonna pass right in front of me. And I don't know what it was. I grabbed him as he walked by. I said, we should talk. He said, yeah, we should talk. Happy hour later and down in the poster session, whatever the thing was. Why don't we meet? I'll be down there. Why don't we meet down there? We're there 2 minutes into the conversation. I sort of explained, why I did what I did, and then we went back and forth in the literature too. I mean, it turned
Mm,
into a series of papers, which was good. I think it was good for the field. 2 minutes later, he says, I'm the new editor of this series on these monographs about stereotyping prejudice. You want to do one? It's like,
yeah.
So it's sort of, I mean, at the space gave us the ability to take the personal aspects out of it,
Yeah.
right? But the personal aspects get in there,
Yeah.
and I think as a young person, there's a buzz to going after senior people and the folks who have the power and stuff, and it's natural, and it's not good.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your credit, I don't think it wasn't like you were pursuing it. You felt experienced it. And, you didn't then go, oh, this is great. I'm going to keep doing it. So,
Yeah, but we did write the papers. We did
yeah.
go back and forth
Yeah.
in the journals, and which I thought was useful.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
but I did get and I got a buzz off of other young people coming up and saying that's the coolest thing we've ever seen at
Yeah.
a conference, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Why wouldn't you? It makes sense. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it reminds me of one of my favorite Robert Trivers quotes, which is that the greater the social content of a discipline, the slower its progress. And that there are, real challenges and difficulties to being, a bunch of people studying people because we have,
mhm.
all the flaws of people, and we
Turns
have,
out,
yeah, we're humans with,
Trivers,
yeah,
Trivers having more than a healthy dose of those flaws for,
of
yeah, oh,
oh
absolutely.
my goodness.
of
There's
the
a,
variety of peopleness.
as a
Yeah.
side note, there's an entire no journalist. I can't believe, just quick aside, Trivers passed away recently. I looked through all of these think pieces about Trivers. They're all by men, by the way, um, which you should also think, why might that be? there's an enormous story about Trivers that is not yet. Um, there, like all the reporters who did Trivers research did not do their homework.
Yeah, not a good man. Very
No,
good scientist, very good thinker,
Hmm.
yeah.
brilliant contributions to the field, but yeah, not a good person.
The last thing I'll say is apparently a lot of those papers. This is something somebody said. I won't say who said it because I don't want to. I'm not sure if it's accurate. But what I heard was a lot of Trivers's papers were written in Irv Devore's kitchen with Irv Devore. So that's also something to look into. I don't know the full story there. Yeah.
I've been told, whoever I heard this from, that maybe from Lita, that Irv Devore is probably the most significant mentor and grower of evolutionary psychologists, uh,
Yeah.
evolutionists. Journalists.
Yeah. We in this my cohort of at least UCSB of psych people, we refer to like an Irv Devore as this sort of a puppet master person who's not sort of well known outside the area, but is the originator or
Mm-hmm.
the salon keeper, maybe is the right
Hmm.
way of sort of
Sort of like the
inspiring
the
people.
George Harrison of evolutionary psychology, the underrated
Eh,
compositional backbone.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Steve, we've had Keela Williams on,
Oh,
and she
cool.
talked a lot about the work. Is there stuff that you're currently chewing on or thinking about that you find really exciting, or is there something that if people are listening that don't know your work and you've done so much, and like there's affordances or stereotypes are specific to these different groups. Out of all of that, set, is there something either that already exists or that is going to exist in the future that you feel like, if somebody had 4 minutes to spend with Steve Newberg, what science do you think they should know?
So, wow.
You have 3.5 minutes
I,
now, sir.
yeah, now I got 3.5 minutes. Uh, so there's a line of stuff that comes out of the sort of the affordance management approach to stereotypes framework that I'm really excited about that Oliver Sung is working on, and that Becca Neal is working on in a at sort of a broader sort of pulling together other sort of sub phenomena as well. And that's the idea of directed stereotypes. And we could think about this, and I don't know if you've seen this work by Oliver or not. There's a paper in JPSB this past year on it, with, I think, Becca and Keela. Uh, but the idea here is that, we tend to think about, when we think about, making inferences about people, that we make inferences about their traits or their capacities or something like that. And some of these traits are, you know, someone is friendly, right? Or someone's competitive or whatever, caring, uh, aggressive, as if we presume that people have these non-directed behavioral inclinations towards folks. But of course they don't, right? What I really care about, if I want to manage the potential affordances that you have for me, or the people I'm invested in, is I want to know what you're going to do to me, right? Or to these other folks, right? I don't really care what you're gonna what whether this, right? Because if I have to predict your behavior towards me, I need to predict your behavior towards me. And so it turns out that what people actually have in their minds, which we don't discover because we never ask the questions, right? This is part of our measurement problem, because we don't have theory that sort of suggests this, is that we actually have these really nuanced notions of people having inclinations towards other kinds of specific other kinds of people, right? So some of the stuff that came out of Oliver's uh, work with his collaborators, who's more competitive, men or women? Well, of course, men are more competitive. Who's more competitive towards young women? Young men or young women? It's like, well, young women are more, right? Young women are more, okay, right? As soon as you add the towards whom, all of a sudden there's all these things that swap. They look very different. And of course, that's the level of representation that people need to have in their heads if they're in fact going to predict other people's behaviors. And so, I think, Becca gave a talk at uh was it SPSP? Yeah, I think it was I think it was at SPSP, uh, where she sort of expanded on this toward whom notion of that they're classes of characteristics that really are fundamentally relational, and they're about towards whom, and we need to have that's the level of representation you need to have for those things, right? Intelligence isn't relational, right? To have just to know whether someone has the ability to process information effectively and efficiently, whatever, that's good. But aggressive? No. Yeah,
Mm.
that doesn't do the job. And so I think that's a really interesting sort of next implication that sort of falls right out of the logic of the affordances management.
Mm.
So if we're doing first principles and we start with the first principle of the basics of evolutionary of affordances management, then and you work that through, you're going to get to the idea that some of these things have to be directed. And so I'm really excited to see what that's going to pop out coming out of their work. There's some work I'm doing with a student of mine, Tiffany Chin, uh, where we're applying this broader affordances management perspective to prejudices against immigrants, and let me say towards immigrants, because some are actually quite fair, and sort of again that if you look at Gallup polling, if you look at politicians, you look at all the discussion, it's like there's immigrants, right? Well, no, they're actually immigrants, and they're different kinds of, they're here for very different reasons, and depending on what your own vulnerabilities and goals are, those characteristics that you think that they bring different characteristics with them. The characteristics might pose opportunities for you. They may pose threats to you. Uh, One of the interesting implications that we've never, and so using that as a case to sort of look again, greater new, different kind of groups. But one of the interesting things here is that uh, most of our feelings towards people, most of our prejudices are probably ambivalences. And I know ambivalence is a single dimension, and so ambivalence has to be positive and negative. But the fact is we have these different kind of negative ambivalences. We'll need a different word for it, right? There are folks that they both make you angry and they make you afraid. And well, fear leads you to want to go away, and uh, and angry makes you want to go forward and to recalibrate their behaviors, right? And the like. Well, people they emerge if you believe that our impressions, that our stereotypes about groups can be profiles of different kind of threats, then you have to acknowledge that you've got profiles of emotional responses, and there are all these ambivalences that again are getting masked by the typical ways in which and you can have different kinds of sort of positive. I'm putting air quotes around positive and negative because I think it's a really problematic word when we're thinking about affect. And to be thinking about some as positive and some as negative, it totally masks what these affects are for. Uh, uh, but there are all sorts of different flavors of these ambivalences, and I think there'll be a lot of traction as we sort of unpack that and demonstrate that and show where the different ones come from. Again, if you're interested in fixing the car engine, you better understand what's actually going on inside this. If you want to do interventions to reduce prejudices that you're not that you're opposed to, right? Well, you better understand actually what these prejudices actually look like and what these feel. And so I think there's some really interesting stuff in that. So of the things that are coming out of sort of that perspective that I've taken, I think those are two of the things that I'm sort of most interested in right now. We're also applying, Barlev and I are applying this framework to be thinking about anti-Semitism, because I think it's actually another one of these groups where there's a lot of ambivalence, there's a lot of competing uh, uh, kind of sort of different kind of affordance stereotypes of
Mm.
opportunities and threats, and qualitatively different kind of threats. And I think that would benefit. So it's both a case study and something that's of interest to me for other reasons. But I think there might be some very nice leverage there as well. Uh, uh, David's doing some interesting stuff on on anti-Semitism and coalitions, and very interested to see what ends up coming out of all that.
Yeah, and I've been working with Barlev and Jamie and Sneezer. It's sort of been on hiatus, but we have some really interesting data on anti-Semitism, looking at the alliance structure and who people think the allies of Jews are politically and who people think the enemies of Jews are politically. And we're looking at if they're the ally of one of my enemies, is that going to predict anti-Semitism? Or if they're the enemy of one of my enemies, is that going to predict more positive attitudes toward Jews? And it turns out that just these indirect relationships of who you view the allies of Jews and the enemies of Jews and how you feel about those allies and enemies, just those indirect pathways are explaining something like 40% of the variation in anti-Semitism. And then it's all indirect in terms of like where are Jews situated in the political alliance structure. And that is it's just where you think they're situated in the alliance structure. So I'm excited about that. It's obviously inspired by a lot of Steve's work in terms of understanding prejudice in a more nuanced and functional way. That it's not just a single continuum of positive and negative. It's much more complicated. And yeah, I love this work because it unearths the complexity that we didn't know was there. And it's interesting and functionally organized complexity that ought to be of interest to evolutionary researchers and anyone who's interested in prejudice itself.
Yeah, Oliver Sung has this great little line that he likes to use that we've been stereotyping, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're presuming that this is all sort of really simple, right? And people people are so much more complex and for really good reasons and way more interesting than we've been giving them credit for. And I understand, you start your model simple and you start with but we're too mature of a behavioral science to be still living in those old models.
Yeah. Do you think there's a little bit of wishful thinking that's probably like well intended, which is that if prejudice or stereotyping is simple or unitary, then maybe there's like an intervention we can do. But if it turns out that it's multifaceted and more to the point, which I think a lot of your work is pointing towards, it's also largely rational to the extent that it's in response to structural issues. It's pointing towards the way you reduce prejudice or discrimination are largely structural things. They're not really things where you can just like have this pill or like,
Yeah.
hit your head 10 times against a board and now you're not prejudiced. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I mean, it's kind of in that category. Do you think that some of that is that there is a resistance because when you get more truthful, it points to harder to fix or more structural things?
I mean, I think that I suspect that that's not consciously what people would admit to
No,
themselves.
sure. Yeah.
I suspect that that may be part of it. It also may be part of that. It says something uh, that maybe our field isn't the field to fix this, right?
Mm,
So
Mm,
right, so if the solutions
yeah.
are changing the environments in which people are growing up, and if they are other kinds of things you need to do to create opportunities and reduce threats and the like, and that moves. The solutions then require politics and they
Mm,
require community organization and they require investment of money.
yeah.
And well, that's not what psychologists do, right? That's not what right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
in some ways the irony there is that psychologists, I think, even way more than sociologists, are the ones that sort of uncovered and turned, the explorations of prejudice and intergroup conflict into a science,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and in the end, may not be, the largest contributor to the solutions. Uh,
Yeah. Or at least, I mean, the charitable version is that you can't solve the world, like you said, by yourself. And so it's like, oh, we realize we need all this other stuff, like all the things you
Mhm.
articulately listed.
Right.
Yeah. And until you you're just like a lowly PI in a lab, and you're like, well, how am I going to do that? So
Right. Right.
again, I think it comes back to a coordination problem. But I think to your credit, I mean, I think like sticking to the guns of we are being accurate about what the psychology is, and therefore, if it is a structural problem, like maybe it will provoke or I think that's good to stick with, right?
Yeah.
Even if we can't fix
Yeah.
it.
But by the way,
Yeah,
I don't think it's just a structural problem, right? I mean, I think with even within, if we look within whatever sort of you know, you know, cells of interacting structural things, you still find a lot of variation
yeah,
within
no,
there,
for
how
sure.
people are responding.
Yeah,
So I think there's plenty of work to be done if one has an aim of addressing some of those challenges. Uh, I think another part of it is actually even uh, simpler in the way, in the sense of, you know, most scientists get used to using certain tools, and they may be methodological, they may be conceptual, and that's sort of what, and they have an identity around those tools. This is what I do. This is what I know I'm good at. This is what I've been rewarded for. And, I think challenges like mine, which sort of say, the tools are wrong. You keep using a tool that's too simple to understand your phenomenon that you're interested in. But now you got to change. You got to
yeah.
shift, right? You have to use different measures and they're more complicated. You have to analyze your data differently. Uh, the stories sometimes aren't so simple, right? When you're sort of trying to articulate something, it's not as easy. When you're getting from the eighth floor of the elevator down to the lobby to explain what it is that what it is that you're doing, and what exactly it is that you're finding. And so, I mean, that's pushing people out of their comfort zones, which is why, who is it that said that, science advances by the death of old
Yeah,
scientists and
Max
the
Planck.
birth
It's
of
a
new ones?
Max Planck. It's a science progresses one funeral at a time.
Okay, that's right,
Yeah,
right. And so we're all somewhat constrained by what we know and what we're used to doing and what we think is good and what our identities are. And so uh, you know which is why I think we always need to be looking. I'm way more interested in convincing and getting the attention and the interest of young people than I am of people of my generation, right? The people of my generation, uh, you know, can give me what's uh, benefits or status in the kind of way that young folks can, but in the long run, it's the young folks that are actually gonna determine whether the ideas are right and where they can go, uh, and the like. It's actually, in my mind, what sort of the biggest joy of mentoring is. I like mentoring. It's an important part of my identity, and the idea of young people going off and, I mean, and taking things in these incredibly cool different kind of directions that I never would have thought about, but knowing that you were sort of a part of that, I think is maybe the most rewarding. I suspect that my impact on the field, whatever it ends up being, will be way greater as mediated by my students than anything that I end up that ends up having my name on it. I hope anyway. That's maybe that's just a hope, but it's
it's it's
probably a
almost like
decent prediction.
differential reproductive success you can
Yeah,
have.
yeah, right.
Yes,
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no. I mean, if any, I mean, you have a good track record thus far. I think, you've,
Jamie and
yeah,
Oliver and
yeah,
Keela, and there's just so many. I can't.
Beck and Neil.
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Uh,
I'm forgetting, so or not forgetting, but I can't. I'm not going to list everybody. Yes,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like Tom Gilovich or Brenda Major too, right? Even you had your own story,
mhm,
and the
mhm.
people that influenced you.
Right,
Um, yeah,
right.
so yeah, if you feel like you're being your science is being ignored, the people you should be worrying about are what the young people think about you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And just I think their open-minded attention is probably the yeah. So I'll throw this out there. I don't know if this is right or not. I've never really thought about this before. That the open-minded attention of young scientists is probably the most important resource
Mm.
uh, that there is out there for the advancement of science. Uh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that sound
Yeah, I mean
right?
they're probably the closest thing we can get to a an impartial jury to evaluate these ideas that it's before they've developed their allegiances to their particular school of thought and their particular theoretical framework and their and and they can just evaluate all these different ideas with fresh eyes in a way that's less biased by years of building coalitions with different people, you
Yeah.
know.
Status
And then they have the
games.
You
Yeah.
know,
capacity and the time to
Yes.
actually, if the ideas grab,
yeah.
to actually make important things happen with them.
Yeah, they have time
Yeah.
to read the whole paper.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Lita
I was
always.
thinking in terms of
No,
years,
exactly.
not in terms of like the
No, but
next
they
half
also have the
hour.
time to read the whole paper.
Yeah.
Lita always said you should be writing to young graduate students, and I think it was exactly for this
Oh,
reason
that's
you
great.
described, Steve, is that when
I
when
like that.
they're and I think even I asked, like, I was like, who were you writing to? And it was like to young graduate students, and it was for all these reasons we're talking about. So I think that that's always been really helpful for me too, is like and I think sometimes some graduate students really get, uh, to put it in a hokey way, a bee in their bonnet about like some theory, and they really go after it, and they want to convince like the senior person. And I think sometimes that's a mistake, like that's not the right way to write the paper. The right way to paper is, as David just said, like it's, you're writing to the jury of young students, and that should be the tone and the approach. And you don't have to convince this person who's living, as Steve put it, was, their salary depends on hanging on to this idea. They're probably not going to let
Mhm.
go, unless they're very rare and special
Mhm.
people.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to insult them if you don't have to.
No, that's true
That
too.
what was it? Is it Dan Dennett who's got this
Yeah.
sort of philosophy
Hmm.
of how to write a great review,
Yeah.
right? And what it starts with, understanding the position so well that they would just be overjoyed as you sort of explain it back uh, to them, and that's sort of the first thing, not offended. You're looking it up right now,
Yeah, it
so I
says
can.
first and most important, you should attempt to express your target's position so clearly, vividly, and fairly that your target says things like, I wish I had thought of putting it that way.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so that's so beginning with respect and generosity, right? Of caring. I mean, it's a cue of that you care, right, about doing this. And I think that's a really useful thing. So we don't want to offend the old folks,
Yeah,
but mm,
yeah,
Yeah.
but sometimes, you know, no one should get offended.
yeah,
Right. I mean, I think this is
yeah,
again the thing. Someone attacks my perspective. Yes, I'm going to get irritable about it, but what I should do is I should appreciate it as an opportunity. First of all, they paid attention, so they gave me the gift of attention, and then the second thing is that they've given me an opportunity, to learn and or defend, right, and to make my case better, right. If people don't understand what I'm writing, that's on me, right? This is actually one of the really important lessons I think for grad students, right? You know,
mm,
if they misinterpret, that's on you. That's your job, right? Uh,
yeah. That's good advice. Um, Steve, is there anything about you that people might not know, like hobbies or
hobbies, hobbies. I've had several people tell me recently that I need a hobby. Uh, so what way back when I used to be musician, but stopped while I was still too young to get really serious about it. But I had talent way back when
mm,
that that maybe that's a little bit interesting. I think. Well, I'll tell you really briefly something I'm doing right now that's very different than this, and that is when I was chair of the Department of Psychology. Uh, we started something that's now evolved. We call it Psych for Life, and it's an attempt to sort of bring the it started when I was chair of the department. You know that 75% of psych majors don't do anything psych related. I mean, they do everything is psych related, but they go into business or they go into health
Yeah.
or they go into law. They don't go into become therapists or to be researchers or things like that. And so when I was chair, I thought, well, how do we serve them well? Because the system isn't designed for that really. And so
Mm.
we started this thing we were calling it Psych for Life. The psych department will be for you for life. And that if we played with the premise that we were going to be with you and add value to your life and for life, what would we do differently? So we started doing
Mm.
a bunch of things having to do with careers and mentorships and whatever. We then asked the question, well, what do we do for our alums after they're out? And so here's the second meaning of Psych for Life, and that is we have an evidence-based psychology, science, right? That has useful lessons, useful insights about relationships and about, raising your kids and about well-being and about career and about community. Can we figure out a way of really easily getting that into people's hands in ways that are actionable, that are engaging, that could be effective? And so we thought about this just in the terms of, okay, can we send stuff out to our alums? Over time, it became clear that maybe there's sort of a broader value of this out there in the world and people encouraging us. Raised a good amount of philanthropy to sort of start to build this. We've now shifted it. We're going to be rolling this out of the ASU. The
Mm.
first instantiation will be sort of as an app, covering a bunch of topics, but really helping people have skills, sort of life skills within these different kinds of domains that they might now be able to integrate into their everyday lives and help solve little challenges before they become real problems. And so we're actually spinning this out as a startup, and I am now the CEO president of this new startup that I'm going to be doing while I'm an academic.
Wow.
We'll see how well that goes. I should have a separate conversation with David about being a business guy. Uh, but that's something that's sort of exciting to me. The challenge, right? I'm trying to marry everything together and do both of these things, and but that's it's as scientists we're problem solvers and of one sort, and getting these tools out to people in ways that and to a lot of people in ways that can be useful to them is just another kind of problem to be solved. Both how do you design the systems, but how do you find what the right markets are and how do you engage in those markets and how do you sell and all those things. So that's sort of been exciting to me as well. And that's probably something that people don't know, that it's sort of a very different side, more of an applied kind of side, but trying to have an impact in that kind of way as well.
That's fantastic. Does it exist yet, or is this coming out?
It,
Did
it's
people
so
look
we,
it
we
up?
sort of have beta versions of
Mm.
it. We're in the midst of we've been getting some feedback. We're in the midst of sort of this next sort of like beta plus version. But we think we'll be ready to go out and to have like real people using it, come sort of end of summer or
That's
so.
fantastic.
We're
That's
sort
great.
of building some new, I think, reasonably fundamental features into it that significantly raise the value of it, that bring it beyond sort of just psychoeducation stuff, uh, in ways that people can integrate into their lives and make it really more usable. So, and of course, doing the user research and all. I mean, it's been a bunch of different challenges, and they're all interesting. So,
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, that's wonderful for social things. Like if we have the data, it's again this
mm,
coordination problem, and people want to know what do I do for my um,
mhm.
what do I do with my kid here or myself or my spouse? If there's data and getting that to them without ads or snake oil or you selling something to them,
That's right.
that's fantastic.
Right.
And it's going to make the science better to the degree
Mhm.
that there's a market outside of entertaining undergrads. No, big lecture hall. Yeah.
We hope so. We
Yeah.
hope so. Yeah, David, I'll probably reach out to you actually to, what's it like also to be running a business.
Yeah, please do. I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Okay, or at least how you solve some of the
Yeah.
challenges of
Business humor.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Steve, this was wonderful. We really appreciate it.
This was
And
it's a lot of
it's
fun.
Yeah, it went by quick, and yeah, it's always fun. There's so much going on, so much throughput in your lab and your
Mhm.
offspring, your academic
Mhm.
offspring. It's thanks for being on. It was lovely.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm flattered, and it's been a lot of fun.
David, why do I always try to start the outros? I never I stop.
Well, we just had a conversation with Steve Newberg.
We just had a lovely conversation with Stephen Neuberg. Time flew. There was
We're still
something on his
figuring
web.
out what this outro even is. What
Uh,
we're
what
even
what
supposed to get.
what was Steve's whiteboard said? Every thought or every idea is a hypothesis. I think that's it said that.
Oh yeah, okay. I buy that.
Yeah,
That
we could
fits
put
in
that
with
on a
like
t-shirt.
yeah, that fits in with like Bayesian models of cognition.
John Tooby famously had a post-it note on his computer that was a little more direct, and it said, "Everything you think you know is wrong."
Hmm. Okay. I like that.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, I have a blog post coming up that's basically arguing that most of what you think you believe, you don't actually believe.
awesome.
I'm really excited about that one.
I
Thinking
believe
of,
that. Does that
yeah,
mean I
I'm glad
don't?
you, yeah. That's a really, really good question. You might not deep down. Who knows?
That's
Yeah.
kind of, I feel like that's very freeing though, because then if somebody's like, I
Yeah.
don't believe you, you can be like, well, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, the thesis is that you may believe you believe those things, but you don't actually believe those things. And there's a difference there. Just because
Yeah.
you believe it doesn't mean you actually believe it.
Right. Yeah. 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 Like we've talked about, like if you actually, the way people believe act when there's a real conspiracy
Hmm.
versus they say there's a conspiracy is very different. I think we talked about Hugo Mercier, I
Yeah, we
think.
talked about it with Hugo Mercier. We also talked
Yeah.
about it with Dan Williams, and I talked
Yeah.
about pseudo beliefs. So I have a big post
Yeah.
coming up on pseudo beliefs, and I think it's a really interesting topic. Anyway,
Doesn't
I don't
don't
know how this fits in with anything.
Well, if you believe David that that was yeah, I didn't even finish that. Well, if you believe you like this podcast, what can people do?
Well, they can say nice things about us on social media, support us on Patreon, leave us a kind review. Those are the big three, right? Can't think of
Yeah,
any other ones.
yeah,
Okay.
that's it. Yeah, and some journalists out there get on the Robert Trivers thing. My goodness, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm just beginning to hear some of the horror stories. Yikes.
Yeah, I didn't meet him in personally, but I did. I was for HBS Rutgers. I stayed in the student dorms and he was staying in the same hallway. And I just remember he was in the hallway. I think like the showers was like college dorms. So I just remember he was like peering out looking out the window with like a towel around his neck, just sort of peering. And I was like going into my room. I was like, oh, there's Robert Trivers. And that was the only interaction I had with him. But yeah, I've never heard so many stories from people having interactions with a human being that were so colorful is the one way to put it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway, on that note,
we can separate the ideas from the man, hopefully, and
exactly. No,
yes,
totally. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes, exactly. Yes.
yeah.
But it was wonderful to have Steve on. Thank you for listening. And David, I'll see you next week.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.